Happy 2025, everyone! Hello, welcome to my channel. If you've been here before, I'm so glad to see you back. If you haven't been here before, my name is Cameron. I make videos about reading and books and what I'm reading and stuff like that, which is what we're here to talk about today. I know most people are probably doing like their 2024 recaps. That'll be next week for me, but every month I go ahead and review here's what I read in the last month. So that's what we're doing today. I am reviewing what I read in December, and I would say I had a pretty successful reading month. I did not hit my 50-hour goal. I have made an official decision that I'm going to forego the 50-hour goal. I think I can do it, particularly if I read more audiobooks, but I don't, at this point, it's like so tiring to try that I'm like, whatever. You know what? That can be something that I forego for this time period. My cat is trying to make a tent right now. Hold on. And by a tent, I quite literally mean like she just wants me to stretch out a blanket so she can lay under it like it's a tent. Anyway, that's an aside. But I read 45 hours this month, which I think is a lot closer than I've gotten recently. I read 15 books in December. Several of them were graphic novels, several of them were audiobooks. Let me actually pull out my phone and tell you my exact stats. So, like I said, 45 hours read. I read 1,517 pages. My average reading speed, because I read several graphic novels, was 216.7 pages. This is also a significant month for me because this is the first month where I read more audiobooks than I did physical books, like books that I read the pages of. So, yeah, I read 15 books and 9 of them were audiobooks, which is hilarious because like 3 of my physical like read books were graphic novels. So I did not do a whole lot of reading this past month. I don't know, I just kind of found myself in a kind of like mindset where I was like, I don't really want to read physical books, which like happens sometimes, honestly. I'm still kind of in it. The first book that I've started reading this year so far is another audiobook, so maybe that's just where I'm gonna be for the next while. But I've found, and let me know if any of you feel this way also, but I found that I just genuinely prefer listening to certain genres. Like I know I love listening to nonfiction, and I know I prefer listening to literary fiction over reading it. So I found myself recently being very drawn to audiobooks because that's kind of what I'm craving reading, especially because it's like cold outside and it's dark outside, so I'm kind of in the mood for some darker or more informational things. So, I don't know if that applies to any of you. That being said, I did find out that I do not like listening to mysteries, and I do not like listening to romances. So that was a fun fact I found out about myself this month. But yeah, let's go back to some stats after I go on that whole tangent. So, my best day read in pages was 600 pages. It's actually 599, but how pretentious of me. Was 599 pages. My best day read in minutes, I read 349 minutes of book, so that might have been completely taken up by audiobook, maybe it wasn't. But yeah, and my average star rating, oh my gosh, it was low this month. I think my average sits around 4 stars because I work hard to curate what I'm reading. Like I work hard in being like, okay, I know I like this genre of book, so I'm gonna look more into this genre. I just wasn't impressed with a whole lot of mine. Normally I sit around the 4-star average rating, but this month I was sitting around the 3.3 star average. So we'll go over what I liked, what I didn't like, and so on, and kind of discuss it. But yeah, the books that I read that were good were really good, and the books that I read that were not so good were not good. So yeah, so let's go ahead and go over that. If you've been here before, you know that I have goal books every month. I try to read at least 1 translated work, 1 classic work, and 1 nonfiction work. So let's kind of review those first. So my classic works. I read the final 2 Anne of Green Gables books. That's an 8-book series. So this kind of fall, this fall and early winter, I've spent most of my time reading that for my classics. So I have finally gone ahead and wrapped those up. I read Anne of Ingleside and Rilla of Ingleside. No, I read 3. Oh my gosh. I read 3. I read Anne of Ingleside, Rainbow Valley, and Rilla of Ingleside, which is more of the story going into like Anne's adulthood. Like, it's a lot more of Anne of Ingleside is like her life when she is a young mother and she has a bunch of kids and she's like still kind of working through that. And then Rainbow Valley is focused specifically on her kids and their childhood. And then Rilla of Ingleside is her youngest daughter and her life as she's living through World War I. And a really interesting thing about that book that I found out is apparently it's one of the most significant pieces of literature written by a woman about World War I. So I was reading it, I was kind of like mind blown because a lot of the Anne series is very much based on the author's real life. So kind of just the things she was going through and the things she was experiencing. So I don't know. I thought it was very, very interesting. I read 3 of those this month. I also, gotta find it, but I read another classic. I read Mystery and White by J. Jefferson Barjan, which is, he was a mystery author in the 1930s. So yeah, I went ahead and read that. A lot of his stuff actually predates Agatha Christie. This book was reprinted for the first time since like the 30s very recently. And so I read it. I just wasn't that into it. I gotta be honest, I think I gave it 2.5 stars just because I was like, Like there's a reason why Agatha Christie is kind of the queen of the genres. Her stuff is very engaging and interesting. And I took so long to read this just because I was so not interested in what I was reading. So yeah. 4 classics, long story short. I'm happy to be done of Anne of Green Gables. I loved the series, let's be very clear, but there's 8 of them. So I'm enthusiastic to read some other classics. So if you have classic recommendations for me, please put those in the comments below. I would love to broaden my horizons on the classics front since I've only been reading Anne of Green Gables for the last 3 months. And then let's talk about my non-fiction reads. Read, singular. I read Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, which is kind of a history of racism in the United States, and it's also about, it's an argument placed by the author about how the caste system, which is I think primarily most influential and prominent in India, actually exists in America in the form of racism based on skin color. And I thought it was so interesting. I've been trying to educate myself on a lot of just being a white woman in America and how I can be a better ally towards people who are not white, you know? So I've been reading a lot about that, and a lot of people for a long time were like recommending Caste, and so I finally got to read it. It was amazing. Not amazing in the sense of things that happened, it was more amazing in the sense of probably one of my favorite nonfictions that I read this year. Yeah, I just adored it. I thought it was so good. So yeah, that's kind of where my mind was with that. And there's also just something that white people in America specifically don't really have to confront a whole lot is the suffering that Black Americans have endured over time in history. And quite frankly, just a great educational resource that book is. And it also it made me uncomfortable, but in a way that was more like I should be like actively working to be a better ally to the Black individuals around me, to the people whose ancestors and even in real time are experiencing these things. So probably my favorite read of December though. Actually, yeah, I think it's pretty unmatched that it was my favorite read of this December. So I really, really recommend that. It is very US centric, but it's very interesting that Black individuals in America are treated very, very differently than a lot of other places in the world, a lot of other like predominantly white countries in the world. So if you're interested in reading about that at all, 100% recommend. It is so good. I listened to the audiobook, which was also just excellent. So yeah, yippee. And then translated work. We had one translated work. It was a graphic novel. It was called So Long, Sad Love by Miriam Malay. I just thought it was cute. It was nice and queer and very, very wholesome, and I enjoyed reading it. As some of you may know, I read graphic novels extraordinarily fast, and I don't always retain everything in those graphic novels just because I'm like, I don't know, I find that books that have like less words are a lot harder for me to retain, which I feel like is interesting. That's an interesting mindset to have. Regardless, So Long, Sad Love is about a woman who goes through a pretty major breakup, pretty significant breakup in her life, and finds out that the man she was dating was not the best guy, and just kind of how that breakup went and how she moves forward with her life and finds out that she's a queer woman. I really liked it. I thought it was very cute. So that was my translated work. Otherwise, for most of the rest of this month, I want to say I primarily read books that everyone kind of, not everyone, but like the New York Times best books of the first quarter century, essentially. And I was like, I need to try some of these out. I want to read more from this list. And basically what I discovered, I think some of the book selections on that list, and don't like cancel me or anything, are a little bit pretentious. After I've read like a lot of them, I am starting to go, hey, wait a minute. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. I just find like many of them, not all of them. Let's remember that my favorite book of 2023 was Demon Copperhead. So I can handle like tragic stories and like with a lot slower pacing, but I don't know, man. I couldn't really do it. So the books that I'm specifically referring to, let's go over them. I read A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. I read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. And I wouldn't say this one technically qualifies because I actually really enjoyed this book, but I read the graphic novel version of The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which was illustrated by Manu Tarsanet. So let's kind of talk about those a little bit. And let's also, despite the fact that I didn't like them, clearly a lot of people do. They're ending up on lists of like the best books of the century so far. So just because I don't like them doesn't mean you won't like them. I'll talk about that in a minute. But like, I don't know, specifically with Hamnet and A Visit from the Goon Squad, I just found myself being very uninterested in it. A Visit from the Goon Squad is a little bit more of like a bunch of short stories, but they're all kind of connected to each other. And it was very middle of the road to me. It wasn't necessarily bad, but like, none of it was particularly memorable. I don't know. And that's just me. Hamnet was interesting in the sense that it very clearly was like well researched, but it also was like a fictionalization of William Shakespeare's youngest son's death. And I just found myself not really being interested in a lot of the characters. The prose of the novel I thought was very pretty, but the rest of it I was like, whatever. That being said, The Road, the graphic novel version of The Road, very, very good. I don't know if I want to read the actual, like Cormac McCarthy's The Road, because it's very long. I've heard it doesn't have, and this is just my personal pet peeve, but I cannot stand when a book doesn't have quotation marks. Like, I can figure it out, but it just slows down my reading, and I don't love it. And I feel like the graphic novel was like succinct enough and got the point across enough that I'm like, do I really need to read like 300 full pages of text to like get it? Because I feel like I've got it. That being said, please let me know if I'm wrong. If you just love that book and think I should read it, please let me know, because I would like to. If I hear like a lot of people being like, no, genuinely, it's so good, I'll give it a try. Another book that I thought was like interesting, but I wasn't like necessarily compelled by, like, and I did talk about this. I made a video about reading my very first Stephen King book, and I read The Gunslinger. And I did get a lot of comments on that video, which I'm super grateful for. A lot of them were saying like, hey, the first book was written when he was like 17, and obviously he's revised it and stuff, but the good books are more towards the middle of the series. My brain is a little bit like, if I didn't enjoy the first book in a series, I don't know if I want to continue on. So I'm still pondering if I want to read more of it. But it was interesting, and it was a lot shorter of a read than a lot of his other books. That being said, I know he has other books that are like everybody loves. So if you have a favorite Stephen King book, please let me know, and I do want to read more. So that was another thought. What else did we read? Okay, so some of my favorites for this month. One of my favorite books from last year, not last year, now is 2025. One of my favorite books from 2023 was Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulet. And she has another book written in the world, and I read it in like the world that Firekeeper's Daughter takes place in. It's called Warrior Girl Unearthed. I have a lot of thoughts about it. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars, but I made a whole video about things I read in a day, and I demolished that book, finished it in a day. Probably the fastest I read this month. and like actually probably quite a while. But very, very good. That was one of my favorite reads. And then I also read a graphic novel called Bubble that I just really enjoyed. I had a good time. That one is also talked about a lot in the same video. So, no, not in the same video. I'm wrong. That one was talked about in the following video where I did kind of my last reading vlog of the year. So if you want to check that out, you're welcome to. But yeah, so that's what I got. Another premise that I really liked, I didn't love the execution of it, was an elderly lady is up to no good. And it was just about like a really old woman who kills people who inconvenience her. Great! Once again, I didn't think it was executed that great, but it was another translated work, and I forgot to mention that. But a fun premise and a quick read. I want to say the audiobook was only like 3 hours, so I got through it fairly quickly. I read The Mysterious Case of the Alberton Angels by Janice Hallett, and The Appeal was genuinely one of my favorite books from this year, her other book, The Appeal. I don't know what it was about the Alberton Angels. Maybe it was just an audiobook and I didn't love listening to a mystery on an audiobook. It wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. I also read another romance novel from an author. I'm not going to say the author's name because I don't want to, like, that author is particularly good about pushing diversity and I don't want to discourage anyone from reading her books, so I'm not even going to say it. But I figured out that I just don't love romance novels that are set with high schoolers. I figured out I just don't like reading from high schooler point of views, because I read Eleanor and Park earlier this year, and I had a terrible time. I loved it in like middle school, hated it when I read it as an adult. So I figured out that I just don't love high school like settings. But that being said, that author has some other great works, so I just overall was very disappointed by it. But yeah, those are the 15 books I read, and my stats. I know you're probably going like, where's that 2024 recap? It's coming. I'm going to tell you all my stats next week. I'm going to talk a lot about my 5-star books, the ones that I'd recommend to everyone. Yeah, so I'll be excited to see you then. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any particular thoughts about the books I read or want to recommend me other things, particularly classics or translated works, please comment those down below. I will be delighted to see them. Yeah, if you like the video, give it a like. If you have liked multiple of my videos or are interested in checking out multiple of my videos, go ahead and hit the subscribe. I post a longer video once a week. I post shorter videos, like shorts, multiple times a week. Most of the time I did take a few weeks off this past few weeks for the holidays, but most of the time I post shorts multiple times a week. So yeah, you can also follow me on Instagram or on TikTok before TikTok goes away in the US at CamBird or at BirdsBooks. And yeah, that's really what I got for you today. What do I want you to do today? Tell me, what are your New Year's resolutions in the comments? Tell me what you're gonna try and do this next year. Do you have any reading goals? Do you have anything like that? Please tell me that in the comments below. Go buy a new plant. I bought a new plant. He's a beautiful boy. He has not been watered recently because they overwater them at the stores, and I'm trying to dry him out before I start watering him on a regular schedule, but that's an aside. And of course, go visit and support your local libraries in 2025. I will see you later. Goodbye!